David, we're interested in the kinds of problems that your group is working on. Maybe you can focus on one in particular and explain to us why you see this as a human rights issue.
Well, we get calls here at the Mind Freedom Office almost every day from people who are being abused in the mental health system, people who are being forcibly drugged, or they experience solitary confinement or discrimination or lack of housing. But in a way, our issue, I kind of sum it up as voices for choices, which is that the people who've been through the mental health system, mental health consumers, psychiatric survivors, we have a voice. There are groups that represent mental health clients, and we need to hear from them. We need to include their voice, and what they're asking for is a better range of choices. More choices other than just primarily psychiatric medication. We're pro-choice on taking psychiatric medication, but a lot of people who are desperate, who are upset, who are traumatized, who have overwhelming despair or are diagnosed schizophrenic or bipolar, when they go for help, often they are primarily offered psychiatric drugs and not a lot of other alternatives like housing and counseling and peer support and advocacy. So that right to a full range of services for health care and for housing and for jobs, that's a human right that is often neglected. So our job here is to help amplify the voice of mental health clients so that they're at the table and that they're heard and that people know that our folks are equal human beings. Most of us in Mind Freedom identify as psychiatric survivors, that is, people who've experienced some kind of abuse or neglect in their mental health care. And we're coming back and saying, let's have major change in the mental health system. Well, at Mind Freedom International, human rights has become the centerpiece, the framework that we can approach a lot of problems in mental health. People who've been through the mental health system are among the most marginalized of all populations. In a lot of studies, people diagnosed with psychiatric disabilities are often some of the poorest people. Their lifespans in the public mental health system are 25 years less than the average person. They can experience things like involuntary electroshock. We had a campaign last year about a guy, Ray Sanford, that was actually getting court-ordered involuntary electroshock on an outpatient basis. They woke him up every Wednesday and brought him to a forced electroshock, running electricity through his head, on a weekly ongoing basis. That's how bad it can get, right? Even right here in the USA. So you have this huge range of problems. In fact, I ask audiences that I speak with, I say, you've heard of racism, sexism, maybe even ableism or ageism. Have you heard of saneism? And a lot of people have never even heard of it, where we think of people with severe mental and emotional problems as if they're even not really human, that they're genetically and chemically different from us, that we can't understand them, that they're dangerous. So there's such a huge array of problems that the human rights framework has really helped us connect with people and society. The big breakthrough this past few years is that the United Nations passed a new treaty. They call it a convention. It's a binding treaty called the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, the CRPD. And our team in the UN actually was part of crafting this treaty, along with a number of other mental health consumers, psychiatric survivors, and hundreds of people from the cross-disability movement. This has given us a tool to bring up issues such as forced treatment and guardianship, and that our disability alone should not be enough. Our disability should not be a reason to take away our rights. That if we have our liberty taken away. It should be for breaking a law as anybody else may break it. So I kind of sum up the human rights issues for us as an activist with the 3 F's, I call them, which is force, fear, and fraud. And force is where what happened to me. As a college student, I had severe mental and emotional problems. I ended up in a psychiatric facility, and I was held down in a solitary confinement cell on a bare mattress and forcibly injected with these powerful drugs and then left alone for days in solitary confinement. And I found out that this is common. It's still common. So that kind of involuntary treatment that's just so extreme is certainly a problem. But there's also the issue of fear, where when you're overwhelmed in our society, and by the way, to be human is to experience overwhelm. To be human is to wrestle with major issues about what is reality and our mortality. I mean, all human beings wrestle with extreme mental and emotional issues. But when we turn for help in our society, we are often given one kind of help. And we're pro-choice about people taking prescribed drugs, but if you or a loved one experience severe problems, you're probably going to be offered the choice of drug, or all the above. We have people that have been put on 9 different drugs at once. So the idea that there's no other alternative is really frightening to people, and there actually are a lot of choices in terms of a whole range of humane alternatives that can work to help people. And then finally, this issue of fraud, which is the average person listens to the media and they're told that our mental and emotional problems are definitely genetic, biochemical, that you have to be on drugs for life. That's what I was told. Turns out there's no scientific evidence for this, and if you believe that perspective, that's okay. But I like to say that in a way our work is not against the medical model, it's against the bully model, which is that a number of our people who have been through the mental health system are bullied. They're told they have no choice, that they have a chemical imbalance, that they have to stay drugged for life, and that's just not true. So the first step is to hear from our people, inclusion, that our people have a voice, that we have our own groups, welcome them to the table, include them. As the disability movement says, nothing about us without us. And so that human rights framework helps us really approach an overwhelming oppression issue.
You know, the third question is also a fairly general question, and it relates more to what you're hearing from people in the community, however you'd like to define community. Mm-hmm. And the question is, what sorts of problems or aspirations are you hearing with regard to human rights from the community?
Well, here in Eugene, Oregon, we've had some real advantages. We not only have the Mind Freedom Office here, but we've had some real activists that have spoken out, like Ron Unger, who's a mental health worker who's spoken out. Kitty Piercy has personally kind of adopted this issue of mental disability as something she really supports. Hugh Massengill, who's behind the camera, has bravely spoken out about being a psychiatric survivor. So he got the City of Eugene Human Rights Commission to adopt mental health as one of its priorities for a few years. And it was an interesting process. We had a number of public forums. We brought people together and we listened to their concerns and we talked with them, but we couldn't quite engage the public. We even had a major conference at the University of Oregon, and it was very hard to get the public to talk about this. But we had some breakthroughs. One thing is the City of Eugene City Council unanimously adopted our resolution. And our resolution says that choice in mental health care is a human right, that there ought to be more choices available to citizens other than just the pharmaceutical approach when they have severe mental and emotional problems. The resolution recognizes that some people feel they definitely benefit from prescriptions. It's pro-choice, but it says that this lack of alternatives is turning into a human rights violation. That if your teenager is suicidal and you go for help, you could end up with your teenager on prescribed psychiatric drugs for life. So what we're hearing from the public is that yes, forced treatment is a problem. We have people locked up at Oregon State Hospital. That's just horrible. And certainly some of the false information that's out there is a problem. But the main issue we've heard during these years of having city forums, and we now have a quarterly Opal network meeting, the main issue is a real yearning for more choices, for jobs, housing, peer support, peer-delivered services. So that's the real interest that we're hearing from people, is that they want to have a whole range of support services available to them to choose from. So we now have a statewide coalition, Oregon Consumer Survivor Coalition. And here in Lane County, we have the quarterly Opal Network meeting in the library that brings together a lot of agencies that support the voice of mental health consumers. So there's a lot of opportunity for Lane County to actually help lead human rights changes in the mental health system.
Great. David, people who are interested in this whole issue of choice and the human rights of people with psychiatric disabilities, if they had to read a book, what would you recommend that they take a look at?
Well, a real breakthrough for us in Lane County is that the author of the book Anatomy of an Epidemic has been here to Lane County several times now. He'll be here in the next few months. The book looks back at the data for the last 20 years of the real heavy-duty drugging that's been going on in our society. And again, he's pro-choice about taking prescribed drugs. It's not being anti-drug. But he's questioning the over-drugging these last 20 years. And now the data is in from this kind of big experiment these last 20 years. And it's showing that over-drugging, as one might think, can actually harm the general population rather than help. And he's also found a number of non-drug programs that have better outcomes for folks with severe problems. So a lot of leaders in Lane County and Oregon's mental health system are actually using this book with the data in it to create a real groundswell of change in the mental health system.